Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dive into a topic that, let's be real, feels completely wrong based on what we see every day. We're talking about the surprising decline of violence. We're going to see what the actual data says and challenge that nagging feeling that we're living in the most dangerous time in history.
I mean, it really feels like it, doesn't it? You turn on the news, you scroll through social media, and you're just hit with this wall of bad news. Conflict, crime, tragedy. It's so easy to get the impression that humanity is just spiraling into more and more violence.
But what if that feeling, that gut instinct that's constantly being fed by the 24-hour news cycle, what if it's just plain wrong? Because when you zoom out and look at the historical data over the long run, the picture it paints is not just different, it's shockingly optimistic. And that brings us to what you could call the violence paradox. It's this huge gap between how violent we think the world is and what the stats actually show. To really get it, we first have to kind of reset our brains about what the past was really like.
And to do that, just think about this quote from Steven Pinker. You know, we look at ancient texts for wisdom, but they're also just packed with routine brutality, things like massacres, torture, slavery that are just completely beyond the pale today. Now, the point isn't to judge the past. It's to realize just how much our standards for what's acceptable have dramatically, fundamentally shifted.
All right, so let's get into the evidence. This decline in violence wasn't just one thing. It's really a story told in three huge historical waves. What Steven Pinker calls the pacification process, the civilizing process, and the humanitarian revolution. First up, the pacification process. So check out this table. It shows your odds of dying violently in a pre-state, tribal society compared to a modern one. And wow, those numbers are just staggering. In a lot of hunter-gatherer groups, warfare was responsible for something like 15, 20, even 30% of all male deaths. Now compare that to the 20th century, which had 2 world wars, remember, where all violent deaths combined were just 3% of the total. The big takeaway here is that creating states with a monopoly on force, what's called a leviathan, put a stop to the endless, chronic raiding and feuding.
Okay, next is the civilizing process. And this chart is mind-blowing. It shows that the homicide rate in Western Europe has dropped by a factor of 50 since the Middle Ages. 50! Life went from being incredibly cheap, where some silly insult could get you killed in a brawl, to a world where murder is actually a shocking rare event. And this wasn't some government program. It was a slow, centuries-long shift in our attitudes and self-control.
And finally, we have the humanitarian revolution. Look at this. In just over 100 years, things that had been around for basically all of human history, like judicial torture and slavery, were systematically abolished. It was fueled by these new Enlightenment ideas about reason and human dignity. All of a sudden, stuff that was totally normal became totally unthinkable.
So we've seen the what. Violence has gone down, a lot. But the really big question is, why? And the answer, it seems, lies inside us, on the timeless battleground of human nature itself. You see, the story of declining violence isn't that humans magically became good people. No. It's a story about how our historical circumstances changed in a way that let our better angels, the parts of our brains geared for peace and cooperation, win out more often against our inner demons, our built-in capacities for violence.
And these inner demons, they're not just one thing. They come in a few different flavors. You've got practical, predatory violence to just take stuff. You have dominance to figure out who's boss. You have revenge for simple payback. Sadism, which is the twisted pleasure in someone else's suffering. And maybe the most dangerous of all, ideology. The belief that your perfect vision for the world justifies any amount of violence to achieve it.
But on the other side of the coin, we've got our better angels. There's empathy, our ability to literally feel what someone else is feeling. There's self-control, the little voice that tells you to stop and think before you act. The moral sense, which gives us ideas about fairness and treating others right. And finally, reason, our incredible ability to step back, think things through, and figure out better ways to live together.
Okay, so if human nature has both of these sides, what was it that actually tipped the scales? Well, the answer seems to be 5 major historical forces that have consistently given our better angels the advantage. So it all starts with the Leviathan, the state,
which just tamps down the day-to-day violence. That stability then allows commerce to thrive, and suddenly people become more valuable to you alive than dead. Then, trade and working together can lead to feminization, which is really about a growing respect for women's lives and interests. This whole interconnected world then gets a huge boost from cosmopolitanism, things like books, literacy, and media that help us see the world from other people's shoes. And tying this whole thing together is the escalator of reason, the simple but powerful idea that we can use knowledge to solve our problems and build better societies.
Which brings us right up to today and to the really big question: can this trend keep going? Is this more peaceful world we've built actually guaranteed to last?
Just look at this number, 0. Let that sink in for a second. That is how many times the world's great powers have fought a war directly against each other since the Korean War. For pretty much all of history, war was just what great powers did. This period, what some call the Long Peace, is one of the most incredible and honestly underappreciated facts of our lifetime.
But, and this is a really important but, we have to stay realistic. As this quote reminds us, a long peace isn't a forever peace. All those historical forces we talked about have changed the odds of a major war, but they haven't made it impossible. Our progress isn't some law of nature. It's an achievement we have to work to maintain.
And that really leaves us with the final thought here. The things that made our world more peaceful, democracy, trade, reason, empathy, they were all built. They aren't our default setting. So the ultimate question really comes down to us. What are we going to do to protect and strengthen the forces that keep our better angels in charge? That's a question worth thinking about. Thanks for watching.